And as mentioned in the preview at the beginning of the hour, we're going to go over some very common things that a lot of veterans and families of veterans are always confused by, miscommunicated to, etc. So, Mr. Pomerance, I want to thank you for your time. Thank you for joining us on the Lima Charlie Show.
Well, thank you so much, Rob. Honored to be here. And thank you for having this show, getting information out to those who have served and to the members of their family who likewise serve along with them. One of the most important missions that we all have. So I thank you for what you're doing.
Yeah, and thank you. And I know you have an interesting backstory of what led you into law and specifically this area of law. As I would think most of our fellow patriots and such online know that when you go into public service and you have a government job, clearly you're holding back on some things, right? You could go and be a power broker on Wall Street or whatever, but instead you chose to serve veterans. Could you share that little story with us before we get into some of the details here?
Yeah, I'd be honored to. I had an uncle who served boots on ground in Vietnam. Very proud Marine Corps veteran. I've learned there is no other kind of Marine Corps veteran.
Right.
So he certainly fit that mold. And when he came back from his service, he used his GI Bill, which we'll be talking about at some point today, I know, to attend law school and became first an attorney and then a judge. And when I was quite young, I saw him presiding over his courtroom in Otsego County, New York. I was impressed by the entire scene, and in my squeaky 5-year-old's voice, I proclaimed that day that I was going to be a judge like my uncle. And he said, "Well, you'll have to be a lawyer first." And I said, as a 5-year-old is wont to do, "Sure, I'll be that." Fast forward to the time of my life when I was indeed applying to law schools. My uncle had passed away, unfortunately, shortly after my time seeing him presiding over his court from a cancer that we now know, all these years later, to be likely linked to his exposure to Agent Orange when he was serving boots on ground in the U.S. Marine Corps in Vietnam. And I asked the leadership at Albany Law School, "Are you doing anything with the VA hospital that's diagonally across the street from the school? If so, I want to volunteer my time in my uncle's memory." They said no. And then my parents said, kind of half jokingly, "Well, I guess you'll have to start something." The expression, I think, is that fools rush in, right? So I rushed in. And during my first year of law school, I founded Albany Law's first ever veterans' rights pro bono project, which is still flourishing to this day. And that began my life's journey in a field of law that I never had even heard of when I went to law school in the first place. So it shows two things. One, you never know what's going to happen. And two, this mission of service, as you well know, once it kind of gets into your bloodstream, it does not come out. I'm not a veteran myself, but in serving veterans across New York State and beyond, I've realized that this field is in many ways an endless field. It dovetails with almost every other area of law you can imagine. And in case any attorneys are listening to this particular episode, whatever your practice area is, the sales pitch I always give is we can find the veterans law antecedent in that practice area. So happy to talk shop with anyone and everyone who's interested in engaging in this same mission of service because there is no sort of one size fits all pigeonholed veterans law approach. Veterans law touches many, many different areas, and there is a need for fellow travelers in all of them.
Yeah, 100% agree with you. It's been a long we used to call it barracks lawyers, right? There's veterans out there that say things that sound like it's legal advice, but they really don't know if it's true, and they
It's
spread it like
exactly
crazy.
right.
Yeah, so we
One
need
thing that
to
we get far too often are the folks who will call and say, "Someone said," and then they quote what they think the law is. And the fact of the matter is, most of the time, someone, whomever someone is generally wrong.
yeah, or they're holding a bubble wrap comic strip with the advice on it. That's where they get it from.
Exactly, yeah.
So,
And a lot of times, too, the expression is the law changes as often as the tides. In my 12 years of working for New York State, the law as it exists today in, say, the disability compensation landscape or the GI Bill landscape is very different than it was 12 years ago, or in some cases, even 6 months ago.
right. Yeah, well let's start there because one of the topics I did want to bring up with you, I mentioned beforehand was, I'm personally a GWAT veteran, okay? So I was overseas gosh, 20 years ago now. Um, and I went back to school afterwards, and at the time they changed the GI benefits from the conventional Montgomery GI benefits to what we now call as a post 9/11 benefits. And to enroll in night school, which I did, you basically have to, at the time, this is 2000, this is 20 years ago, just shy of 20 years ago, you have to basically sign and kind of replace your old benefits with the new benefits. And if
Right.
you could catch our listeners up to speed, this is kind of a hot topic among the folks that are in college now. Something changed this year because some folks that were in my era of service, I joined in the 90s, I actually kind of got shorted a little bit,
Hmm.
economically speaking, from the old benefits to the post 9/11. Could you walk our listeners through the short version of how that came to be and what the real deal is now in 2025 going into 2026?
Yeah, definitely. And what this actually involves is the highest court in the federal judiciary, the United States Supreme Court, in a case called Rudisil, Rudissill. And this pertains to veterans who, exactly like you're describing here, gained eligibility through multiple periods of military service to use both the Montgomery GI Bill and the post 9/11 GI Bill. Now, for a long time, what was happening was the U.S. Department of Veterans Affairs was giving such veterans instruction about which of the two GI Bills they could use, how much eligibility grand total they had to use it, what deadlines applied to their usage of it, and the one that was the strangest was the order in which they could use it. And in a nutshell, what happened in the Rudisil case is the United States Supreme Court took a look at it and in a overwhelming decision said, okay, VA, this makes no sense. And the reason why it makes no sense is nothing in Title 38 of the U.S. Code actually requires a veteran to use one specific GI Bill before the other.
Hmm.
And so what the court concluded was, hey, veterans, if you are eligible for both, if you have met the criteria for both the Montgomery and the post 9/11 GI Bill, you may use either one in any order that you want. Okay? The VA cannot instruct you to use post 9/11 before Montgomery or vice versa in any order that you want. And the reason is because there is nothing in the law that restricts you from doing that. Very much a plain language of the statute type of decision.
Right.
The other question that pops up a lot, particularly in the wake of Rudisil, is how many months? For a long time, veterans were being told you could use a grand total of 36 academic months of benefits. That is not correct. The statute on point for that is Title 38, Section 3695, subsection A, which says you have 48 months grand total that you can use if you are mixing and matching those benefits together.
Hmm.
So, again, the holding in a nutshell, when you combine all those things together, is a veteran who accrues educational benefits through both the Montgomery GI Bill and the post 9/11 GI Bill may use either one, because the law says you can, in any order, because again, the law says you can, up to a 48-month aggregate benefits cap.
Yeah.
That's the way the law is situated today, and thankfully, we're working now with many veterans across New York State who are utilizing exactly that program, or those programs, more accurately.
Fantastic. So if there's someone like in my era or my time of service that goes, oh wait, this is the scenario I have, and they want to go back to school and they want to use something, where would they start? I mean, is that something you could go and direct with the school? You go to VA online. What's the first steps a veteran listening that might realize they're entitled to more benefits? What's the first thing they should do?
So I'm biased because I work for New York State's Department of Veteran Services.
Right.
So the first thing I recommend is to give us a call. 1-888-838-7697. Again, 1-888-838-7697. Or go online, www.veterans.ny.gov. You can book an appointment with us online there. A couple of quick key things. One, all of our services are free, right? We're a state agency. It's your tax dollars at work. We're
Right.
also not an ivory tower agency. We have field offices all across New York State. So, whichever one of New York State's 62 counties you happen to be in, we have at least one field office that is within relatively close proximity to where you are. And all of our veterans benefits advisors, who are veterans themselves, are well versed in the entire veterans benefit spectrum to include the education benefits piece. So if you think, hey, I think I may have some eligibility out there that I want to still cash in on, right? I haven't reached that 48-month limit, and the deadline still has not expired for me to do so under the benefits package that's to be eligible for, give us a call. Okay, and in fact, that's kind of my blanket advice overall. If you have some questions, or if your family has some questions, give us a call. We'll do a what we call a veterans benefits checkup with you. Won't take too much time. Again, everything we do is 100% free. The worst that we can say is, look, based on the analysis, you're not eligible. Most of the time, when we do those checkups, we find at least one federal or state veterans benefit, and sometimes multiple federal or state benefits that the veteran and or members of their household are not currently getting that they should be getting by virtue of their service. And this is a great example of that, where we might see, oh, look, you still have post 9/11 GI Bill eligibility remaining, and you can go ahead and use that if you want to pursue various higher educational objectives. If you have a certain on-the-job training program that's GI Bill qualified and you want to pursue that through an apprenticeship program, a lot of different options out there that do not get talked about often enough, and that's kind of why we're here. Also, if you like to do some research online, the U.S. Department of Veterans Affairs is a great online tool, which is called the GI Bill Comparison Tool. And I recommend that any veteran or any military connected dependent who has had GI Bill benefits transferred to them take a look at that tool, because if you qualify for multiple different things, multiple options, you can utilize that tool to determine what you can get and when you can get it, and what tends to be the best package that you want to assemble. Because education benefits tend to be very case specific. I can talk to you about yours, for example, and then I can talk to your battle buddy tomorrow who served in the same time in the same unit as you, but they may have an entirely different education benefits picture for which they do or don't qualify. So that's why those individual meetings are so important. Lastly, on the education benefits front, I'd be remiss to not mention a big state benefits change that happened this year as well. New York State, through the Higher Education Services Corporation, has the New York State Veterans Tuition Award, covers the full cost of undergraduate tuition at the in-state rate for any SUNY, State University of New York, or CUNY, City University of New York school. For a long time, that was eligible for combat veterans only. This year, the education law was amended, and the new law provides that a non-combat veteran who served for at least 4 years on active duty is able to get that Veterans Tuition Award as well, which again, pretty nice deal to have, covers that full undergrad tuition at the SUNY or CUNY rate. So there's two pathways in now. Pathway 1, combat service of any length. Pathway 2, non-combat service, but at least 4 years of active duty on your resume. Either of those pathways get you in to get that Veterans Tuition Award through the state's Higher Education Services Corporation. And again, this is a benefit that we don't want to see veterans leaving on the table. You've rightfully earned it. We're seeing the applications up quite a bit from last year, but still not up as much as we want them to be. This is a great chance to pursue higher educational objectives that you have at those state or city schools, and not to have to be paying money out of pocket for it.
Excellent. And then my final thought on the education piece is you kind of hinted towards it. Sometimes you inherit benefits in a sense. Could you just give the brief for folks not familiar? Maybe they're entitled to GI benefits of some sort, but they themselves don't need it, or they don't think they'll need it, and they want to pass it on to their children, let's say. How would that work?
Definitely. So here's the crucial point to that does not get said often enough. That transfer needs to take place while on active duty. Okay? A lot of folks say, well, I'll wait, I'll finish up my time in service, I'll get my honorable discharge, and then I'll transfer it. That's not how it works. I know the rumor mill kind of says that's how it works. That's
Right.
not how it works in reality. Because the military really uses this, from what I can tell at least, as a retention tool, right? Where they say, look, if you continue to serve, you will become eligible to transfer those GI Bill benefits to an eligible dependent, primarily to a spouse or domestic partner or to a child or multiple children. So that takes place while still serving in uniform, not afterward. That's the big place where we see a lot of veterans wind up getting jammed up because they think, oh, I can wait, I can leave service, and then do it. No, do it while you are still in. That's your window of opportunity to do so. The other question we often get is, can we mix and match as far as to whom we give the benefits? And if you're doing a lawful transfer while still in service, you certainly can. So you can say, okay, I have two kids. I'm going to give 50% to Jane and 50% to John. That's fine. You can divide it where your spouse gets part and your child gets part. Any of those types of things you can do. You have the playbook as far as divvying it up in terms of percentages among all the eligible dependents to whom you transfer. But again, the transfer needs to take place while on active service, not afterward.
Yeah, that's a good point, and I'll make sure that we get that out there because we do have a lot of active duty and folks that are family of active duty that listen. So that's a good thing. Remind them way before the ETS out
Yes.
to get that taken care of. Now, if I could, let's toggle a little bit off of that because that's specific to education benefits
Hmm.
for the timeline. But I know from reading some of your huge wins and your cases, which by the way, I'm a fan. I've been watching your work, which is how we
Oh,
get
thank you.
connected. You had an interesting milestone case not too long ago, where you helped a gentleman file and win his um, compensation benefits, and he was a centenarian. It was 100 years old, I believe, if I read that
Yes, that's
correctly.
correct.
So let's talk about the timeline because we have a lot of folks that go, "Oh, geez, I served so long ago. Yeah, now I have these problems, but it's been so long, I can't get benefits." What's the real scoop on that? My new favorite legal eagle here.
So the real scoop on that is it is never too late. Okay. So the gentleman whom you referenced, I met through his daughter when this gentleman was 99 years old. World War II veteran of the Army Air Corps, extraordinary record of service in the Pacific Theater, never had filed a claim for disability compensation in his life. Again, someone said, I always love when someone said to him, nope, you don't qualify for this reason and that reason, none of which was true, okay? If you have a medical condition that was at least as likely as not caused by or made worse by your military service, you can file that initial claim for VA disability compensation whenever you want. And this gentleman, age 99, case in point, right? We won the claim on the date of his 100th birthday
Wow.
for injuries incurred during his Army Air Corps service in World War II. The other piece to this is, well, what if I filed the initial claim? I got a decision back, like, way back in the day, back in the 1980s or something, and I didn't appeal it. The claim went final, right? Does that mean it's game over? Not necessarily. If new stuff comes to light, if you can provide new and relevant evidence, you can reopen that claim, okay? And you can begin pursuing it anew. Now, if you win that claim, you're not going to get paid all the way back to the 80s. You're going to get paid to the date when you reopened it with that new and relevant evidence,
Sure.
unless you can prove to the VA's satisfaction that the VA committed a clear and unmistakable error way back in the day when they denied your claim. Okay? What we mean by a clear and unmistakable error is the VA was wrong on the law as it existed at that time when they denied the claim, okay? And there is no doubt, it is uncontroversial, okay, that the VA would have granted that claim if they had applied the law to it in the correct manner. All right, so it's the law at the time, not today's law, but the law back then. And if the VA got it right, there is no doubt that the decision would have been in the veteran's favor. If you can prove that, you can get paid all the way back to the original date of the claim, even if years, decades have gone by with that claim going final. All right, so that's why I keep saying it's never too late.
Yeah,
It's
that's
never too
interesting.
late to pursue the compensation that's rightfully yours.
And on top of that, I think a lot of folks are intimidated to even file an appeal. And through you, again, through one of your writings, I believe I read this. I'm trying to remember if it was in a journal or what have you, but I read something you had published a while back that and I don't want to misquote the stats, but it was pretty close to 1 out of 3 initial claims sometime have an adverse
Correct.
error. It
Yeah.
could even
An
be a
error. Yeah.
clerical error.
Hmm.
So even if you have all the evidence in the world, sometimes it's just filed incorrectly. It's coded wrong. Someone mismarked a file for you, for someone else
That's
to pay
right.
you. So some people go, oh, well, I got denied. I'm not going to pursue this any further. I gave them all that stuff. Well, what if that stuff wasn't filed in the way that it should have been?
You're exactly right. And we preach this all the time, right? This is why Congress created the appellate process because no one's infallible. And so if the VA makes a mistake, there needs to be a way that that veteran has the opportunity to pursue another bite at the apple. And under the current structure that we have now in 2025, there's actually multiple bites at the apple that a veteran can take. There's multiple appellate lanes that they can pursue. And you mentioned the intimidation factor. That for sure, that's real. And I complain to the VA all the time, and there's no secret about this, that I think they have too many forms, the forms are too long, and the print size is too small. And I think veterans often get intimidated when someone hands them over a big stack of governmental paperwork and says, here, fill this out, and maybe you'll get something. This is why we exist. Okay, this is why a portion of your tax dollars goes to sustain a Department of Veteran Services because we have that network of veterans benefits advisors, all of them VA accredited all over New York State, and we serve as the red tape cutters. It's our job to get you from point A to point B as best we can and as unscathed as we can to get the benefits that are rightfully yours. So don't worry about filling out the forms. Give us a call. Again, 1-888-838-7697 is the key number here. Give us a call. Set up time with one of our advisors. We'll take care of the paperwork for you. That's what we're here for. Don't feel like you can't get the benefits that you earned by virtue of your service just because the form packet is too large and the legalese seems too thick. Put that burden back over on us and we'll do our best to take care of it.
Yeah, love it. That's fantastic. So I think another topic, if you don't mind, as we go forward. So folks, this happens a lot. I've talked to a lot of folks that have done this. They have a disability claim, but they still are capable of working and they want to work. And there's a lot of confusion, especially if no one sat down and told them what, if any, limits are there for them to work and earn a living. Some people go, oh, geez, I'm disabled now. That's what I am. Well, I disagree. What's the legal answer to someone who feels that somehow they're limited on what they can earn and what type of work they can do based on their disability claim? What's the real scoop on that, sir?
So, the legal scoop on that is every lawyer's favorite answer, which is it depends. It depends on the type of case that we're talking about.
Right.
Okay, and let me explain a bit further what I mean by what it depends on. A veteran who has, let's say, a 100% rating for one or multiple disabilities caused by or made worse by their military service is not categorically barred from working. Okay, that's number one on the hit parade here. They are not categorically barred from working. That's often the assumption, oh, I have a 100% rating, therefore, if I work, the VA will take it away. No, not necessarily. There are plenty of times you can have that rating and you can have a full time job, and the VA will not bother you a bit. In certain other situations, though, you do have to be a little bit careful. Those are the minority of situations, not the majority. How do you know which category you're in? Every VA disability is linked up with what's called the schedule of ratings. And the VA has a diagnostic code for that disability or that group of disabilities. And under that diagnostic code, and if you want to stave off insomnia some night, go and look at this stuff online. You can see it's all spelled out there. And it says, okay, if this disability is at this level of severity, you get a 10% rating. If it's at this level, you get a 30% rating, all the way down through 100%. All right? For a couple of disabilities, the holding down of a job, okay? PTSD, for example. If somebody has a 100% rating solely for PTSD and they are engaged in full time employment, the VA may take a second look and say, okay, do you really qualify at that 100% level under the criteria outlined in our schedule of ratings if you're able to secure and maintain full time work? That's not an automatic no, but again, the VA may ask questions about this, and you and your advocate want to be prepared in that situation to answer those questions, right? Yes, this person is working full time. However, there are certain special accommodations made for them in relation to their PTSD. Also, the PTSD is causing challenges in their home life and the following reasons, right? Because there's multiple ways to reach that 100% threshold. The big one, though, you want to watch out for when it comes to the employment piece is something called total disability based on individual unemployability. Okay, total disability based on individual unemployability. It's a mouthful to say, so the acronym, because everything has to have an acronym, is TDIU. Okay,
Mhm.
TDIU means because of the nature and severity of your service connected disability or disabilities, you are unable to secure and maintain substantial gainful employment. Okay? And if you have a TDIU designation by the VA, you get paid out at the 100% rate, even if your percentage rating is something lower than 100%. So, what does the VA look at there? The keywords from Title 38, Section 4.16 of the Code is secure and maintain substantial gainful employment. Couple of exceptions to substantial gainful employment. One, seasonal work, part time work, stuff that when you stretch it out over the course of the entire year means that the veteran is making less than the federal poverty guidelines in that particular job. So, for example, as a veteran, I've worked for a long time. He's a TDIU designation, but he likes being outside. It's very therapeutic for him to be outside and busy outside. He works as a greenskeeper in the warmer months, both of them, I think, in Erie County, uh, and takes care of the greens in a municipal golf course, right? And he's able to go and do that work because it's part-time employment, seasonal employment. And if you stretch out the amount he makes during those couple of warm months that you have out there in Erie County over the course of the entire year, his annual salary falls below that federal poverty limit. So that's one way, even with a TDIU designation, you can still be employed. The other is if you're in a protected work environment. Okay, this goes back to a case called Cantrell versus Shulkin, which established that a national park ranger who unfortunately suffered from irritable bowel syndrome. I hope your listeners are not hearing this during their lunch break. They had irritable bowel syndrome because of their service. They're working as a park ranger. They're taking an awful lot of necessary, very necessary, bathroom breaks every single day, right? To the extent that typically the employer would say, look, that's too many breaks, you can't continue. But the National Park Service made special, extreme accommodations for this veteran out of respect for his service and said, you can continue on in this role, take as many bathroom breaks as you need. That became a protected work environment at that moment where those extreme accommodations were being made because of that veteran's service connected disability. So, regardless of what somebody's making, if they are working in a protected work environment, by definition, that does not qualify as substantial gainful employment under Title 38, Section 4.16. That veteran can keep on getting TDIU benefits and can keep on working in that protected work environment. So that's why I said it depends. It's very fact specific, but the
Sure.
big takeaway here, exactly as you were saying, even if you have that 100% rating, even in some situations, if you have that TDIU designation, you still may be able to continue on with substantial gainful employment with no adverse impact to your benefits. But again, it's best being so by case specific. Give us a call, have one of our advisors take a look at your paperwork, your individual situation, and get an answer that is tailored just to you.
Excellent. And then what about, this is another thing. Do benefits expire? And of course, we're currently at the time of this recording here, we're during a government shutdown.
Mm-hmm.
But even outside of that detail, um, do people have to worry that one day they wake up and they get a letter that says, you know, there's no more benefits. We've
Right.
expired them just due length of time, or we feel that it's, whatever ailments you have must have been improved. Is there any threats or concern about that? And I know it might be an it depends answer, but what would be the answer to that question?
So, a couple of general things before we get to it depends. First of all, during the shutdown period, the good news is veterans benefits payouts, be it for disability compensation, be it for pension, be it for GI Bill, continues uninterrupted. The reason for that is the VA, like the Department of Defense, gets their funding allocations one federal fiscal year in advance to prevent any interruption from hopefully ever happening to veterans benefits, veterans services. So just because the feds are shut down, the veterans benefits payout structure is not shut down. And over the course of my past 12 years in this workspace, we've been here before and we've seen this play out. And thankfully, veterans benefits have continued uninterrupted during all that time, just like they are right now. So that's number one. Number two, there should not be any interruption as far as, oh, the coffers are bare when it comes to veterans benefits being available. The VA has, as of today, the second largest budget in the federal system as far as a benefits providing agency is concerned. Okay, so they have a sizable amount of money in their coffers, and that's by design. That's to make certain that that scenario of the cupboards are bare does not happen. Third, the challenging one, the it depends one. Can the VA try to reduce your rating? Can the VA try to take your disability compensation rating away? The answer there is yes, maybe, if the VA determines that that condition has improved. Okay, so a couple things on that. One, if you have a disability compensation rating for at least 20 years, okay, you have a back injury, you had a 50% rating for that back injury, you hold that for at least 20 years. At that 20-year mark, that rating becomes essentially bulletproof. Okay, the VA cannot take that rating away at that point in time after you have it for 20 years. All right. Secondly, if the VA ever rates any of your medical conditions as a static disability or a permanent disability, that's the VA's way of saying we adjudge at this juncture that your disability is not likely to improve medically during your lifetime. That rating should be safe if it has that designation of being a static or permanent disability. Third, if the VA does feel that you have a medical condition that has improved, right? That back injury thankfully got better over time. You know, you had a really good chiropractor or something, and now all of a sudden you can go back out and play basketball and everything else. They might say, okay, we propose a reduction of your back rating from 50% to 10% or whatever, right? They cannot take that away without notifying you first and without giving you the opportunity to be heard. So if you think, for example, that that proposal to reduce is in error, you can request what is called a predetermination hearing, where you get to and your advocate gets to present the case to the VA of why, in fact, your condition has not substantially improved and why, therefore, your rating should stay the same and not be reduced. And the way you argue those cases is you look again at that schedule of ratings, right? The schedule of ratings is kind of like the cheat codes to this video game, okay? You go in there, you say, okay, my rating is now at 50%. Does the severity of my service connected back condition still check all or at least the majority of the boxes under that 50% line in the schedule of ratings that the VA has for back conditions? If the answer is yes, then you want to pursue that at that predetermination hearing and say, no, VA, here's my symptoms. Here's medical documentation of my symptoms. Here's lay testimony of my symptoms where people are saying, yeah, we see him, hobbling around, or we see her using a cane or a walker, right? And that helps the VA understand, all right, let's leave this rating alone. The proposal to reduce was a mistake. We'll leave it at 50%. So it's not like the VA just comes in the dead of the night and lops off your rating and that's it. The rating stays until you've had that notice and that opportunity to be heard that due process of law guarantees you.
Excellent. Yeah, you just cleared up a whole bunch of things and rumors that we hear all
Good.
the time.
There's a whole briefing that I do that I title Mythbusters, and I'm
Mythbusters,
not
I
quite
love
as
it.
cool as the guys with the pyrotechnics, but there are a lot of myths out there, in
Yeah.
part because the laws keep changing in this area, in part because the regulations keep changing, court decisions might shift the landscape. So our goal is always to try and get from confusion to clarity in this space.
Yeah, that's awesome. All right. Well, now that you're thoroughly warmed up, I got a tough one for you.
Okay, let's see it.
So, and clearly we broadcast all over and we stream, so I don't know where everyone's listening today, but we are headquartered here. Our little studio is in New York State. Of course, that's where you are as well.
Hmm.
So I know that my question to you is going to be specific to New York State, and I don't want any listeners to get confused about the details there. But in New York State, we've had this um, kind of an ongoing discussion for years and a new law called the SAFE Act, which is regarding firearms. And there's a lot of veterans confused about a couple things, and I'll hit on the high points and you can drill in wherever you are comfortable.
Yeah.
Um, so, folks that might have a compensation claim that's related to mental health,
Hmm.
and they also have firearms because they like to hunt. Some veterans are worried to even bring that question up, which is why I'm doing it for them. Some veterans, many veterans, go into law enforcement and they have jobs. They might be correctional officers, it might be transportation, TSA, etc., where they have to carry a firearm.
Hmm.
And they want to pursue some type of mental health proactively or what have you, but they're worried that if they do, they'll lose their job. And then, of course, they're worried about firearms in the house and all these other things. So there's a couple of high points there. And I'd like you to, within the limits that you're allowed, and again, we'll be clear about we're only talking about New York State here.
Hmm.
What should veterans be aware of if they already have firearms? Maybe they want to go get a pistol permit and they're worried that they
Yeah.
can't. Those types of things come up a lot. So if you could clear up
Hmm.
one or more of those, I'd be very grateful.
Sure. I mean, first off, this is a very important topic and a great topic. And actually, a colleague of mine and I, two attorneys tag teaming on this. You can imagine how that went. We're actually speaking online last Monday about this to a number of
Oh,
VA clinical mental health professionals on this very topic. Okay, around the SAFE Act, around the Concealed Carry Improvement Act and its progeny, and also the various machinations of the federal judiciary that have been taking place for quite a while now around this topic because it's, again, a shifting landscape and a changing landscape. The big one that we hear all the time that's pretty easy to clear up is okay, what if I file a claim for PTSD or generalized anxiety disorder or clinical depression? Once I file that claim and once the VA gets that claim, is that going to be reported to my workplace in law enforcement? Is that going to be reported to the firehouse where I serve? Is that being reported to wherever? And the answer is no. And the reason why it's not is Title 38, Section 5701 of the U.S. Code. 5701 is the Confidentiality of Claims Act, okay? Which means that if I work with you on preparing, presenting, and prosecuting a claim for disability compensation, even if that is for a mental health condition, that case is between you, me, and the U.S. Department of Veterans Affairs. And it stays in that pipeline unless you give the authorization for it to go outside of that pipeline. There's one exception to that rule because in the law there always has to be an exception, and that is if the veteran is found to be incompetent, okay, in the eyes of the VA. What does incompetency mean in the eyes of the VA? It means they find through the examination conducted by one of their field examiners that the veteran in question is not able to properly manage their financial affairs. Okay. Sometimes this is a whole different area of focus where we see odd questions being asked, like, "Hey, how much money is in your checking account?" And if the veteran can't answer that question lickety split with a dollar amount, the VA says, I wonder if this person can manage their money. Or they'll say, well, who takes care of things like, writing the checks, paying the bills in your household? Oh, my spouse takes care of that. Can the veteran manage their money, right? So the fiduciary topic is a whole different can of worms that I won't get too deeply into unless you'd like me to. But we have had situations where there has been a finding of incompetency and the designation of a fiduciary for that veteran who has now been found to be incompetent. And that has led to a situation where there have been conversations around the presence of firearms in the home. Again, though, that is an area the law has changed. The National Defense Authorization Act of last year did away with that. And the reason why they did is because it said, look, VA, your definition of incompetency is very different from, say, the New York State mental hygiene law definition, which is far more geared toward personal autonomy and preserving that autonomy whenever possible. So now that whole implication of the Brady Act, right, being implicated if a veteran is found to be, in quotes, incompetent by the VA, is no longer on the table. It was taken off by the National Defense Authorization Act of last year. So even in a situation like that, the veteran does not have to worry about any type of confiscation or heavy handedness taking place. The conversations that we were having, a lot of them anyway, with the clinical mental health professionals last week, focused on the topic of safe storage, which is a major priority of the VA. It's been a bipartisan, regardless of who's in power, they've talked about the importance of safe storage, and in particular, in looking at safe storage during a time of mental health crisis. And this is a crucial topic to look at because we're delving into the realm of suicide prevention among veterans and military families. The majority, the vast majority, okay, of deaths by suicide of veterans take place where the instrumentality of death is a firearm. And that's not a knock on guns. That's not an attack on the Second Amendment. That's a fact
Right.
of what the instrumentality is leading to death by suicide in the veterans population. So it is important if you're a clinical mental health professional, which I certainly am not, but if someone is and they're at the VA and they're talking to a veteran patient, it is important for them to have that dialogue around, okay, are there firearms in the house? If so, what's the plan around safe storage to avoid harm to yourself and to avoid harm to your loved ones? That leads to a very important aspect, often too much overlooked in the safe storage conversation, which is making certain that the person with whom the safe storage is taking place, right? If your cousin Vinny is going to be the temporary custodian of your firearms and your ammunition, okay? That sounds great on paper, but make certain before you do that your cousin Vinny is legally able under New York state law, and of course under federal law as well, to accept that, right? If your cousin Vinny has a rap sheet as long as your arm with multiple violent felonies, right, to use a blatant example, probably Vinny is not the best person to be securing your firearm and your ammunition with. Because now Vinny could be at risk of criminal charges, and technically so could you as the donor of that firearm and ammunition to Vinny, all right? So that's an important aspect of the calculus here when looking at the safe storage plan, making sure that the recipient is one who is lawfully qualified to accept and store during that time of temporary custody to avoid any challenges for them and to avoid any challenges for yourself. So yeah, it can get complicated. It can get into the weeds. But as I said in kind of my parting comments, my closing argument, if you will, to the clinical mental health professionals with whom we were speaking, the worst thing to do is to not talk about this stuff, right? This should not be the subject that shall not be named because it's politically controversial or whatever else. Far better that we talk about it, that we get stuff out in the open, that we have as earnest of a conversation as we can about it, because then people know. They know what their rights are, they know what their responsibilities are. And also, it does clear up some mythology there as well, because sometimes I'll see things online about what the law says about guns in New York State, and I'll kind of look at it and say, no, that's not accurate. I was in Long Island a couple of years ago, shortly after a major U.S. Supreme Court case, the Bruen case, Bruen, came down in this area. And I had a Navy SEAL walk up to me and say, "Did you hear about the Bruen case? There's now no more restrictions on firearms ownership and usage in the USA. Well, not quite. Let's take a look at what the majority opinion actually said. So, getting away from that kind of mythology is really important,
Yeah.
as with everything we've talked about today, to see what the law actually says and how the law actually applies.
Yeah. And I'll just underline this in bold print for all of our listeners' sake. If you are a veteran and you are employed in a field, security or what have you, and you're hesitant to go get some mental health, uh, you know, checkups, don't do that. I mean, you have to deal with that. And if
Agreed.
it takes
Yes.
listening to this from our deputy counsel here in New York State telling you very clearly that if the only hesitation you have is because you're worried you're going to lose your job or you're going to have something else going on there, the risk and reward on that is pretty obvious to me that you got to go get the help. And if you need to call and talk to an attorney again, call this gentleman's office to hear it again. Because if you're putting off mental health, geez, I mean we know where that can go. So
And we see the stats, right? The
yeah,
numbers don't lie when it comes to the number of veterans nationally on average that die by suicide on a daily basis. And when you go deeper into those numbers and you look at the details, a sizable number of those veterans are not veterans who are engaged or have ever been engaged in any type of clinical mental health care. And so exactly what you were alluding to, this is, the worst case scenario, but it's a worst case that happens far too often. And if you're listening to this and you're saying, there's stuff going on, that's okay. And there are individuals who are trained professionals who can assist you in a top quality, confidential manner, be it at the VA, be it in the private sector, regardless what your choice is. Just see someone. Okay. Don't suffer in silence because you don't need to. There are so many good resources out there today that are focused on not just suicide prevention, but really good quality, comprehensive clinical care. You don't need to take the risk for yourself and for your loved ones by saying, I'll put that off until next month, right? Now is the time to do it, particularly if you are thinking those thoughts or feeling those feelings, right, about not waking up tomorrow morning. Make certain that you see that as the red flag that it is and get with the folks who are the professionals who can provide the top quality assistance in that area.
yeah. I try to jokingly refer to, and I'm not sure if I coined this or whatever, but maybe someone else has been saying this for a long time. But instead of getting into the phrases like mental illness or mental health, I say this is mental fitness. You
Mm-hmm.
know, you got
Yep.
a gut, you got to work out. You got to work on your whatever, your quads, your whatever you're working on. You go to the gym, right? And sometimes you see a trainer at the gym. It's the same thing. It's mental fitness. Just you gotta get some tools there to deal with what's going on. You're not gonna ignore it because if you ignore it, just like if you eat junk food all day like I used to, guess what? Eventually you're gonna not be able to ignore that.
That's
So
and it manifests and then it mushrooms, and when
yeah,
things start to cascade, that's when the problems really begin.
yeah,
Now, I'll say this too. I do plenty of jabbing at the VA in the work that I do, but one of the areas where the VA has historically distinguished itself is in the area of mental health care. A lot of the therapies, a lot of the protocols that are seen as best in show, not just in the federal government, not just in the US, but around the world right now, had their origins through the research and development of VA medical teams. And so, when looking at the VA as a healthcare option, this is an area in which they historically excel. And as a veteran, you likely have access. Not every veteran does, that's a whole different ball of wax, but the vast majority of veterans do have access to VA healthcare of some form. And even for those veterans who are not traditionally enrolled, let's say, in the VA healthcare system, under federal law, if you report to any VA medical facility and you report that you are experiencing a mental health crisis of any kind, federal law demands that you receive care at that VA, that you receive care for a minimum of 90 days and longer if clinically necessary. Okay? And that's regardless of what your character of discharge is, how long you served, where you served, what branch you served, or any of the other stuff. If you are a veteran of any length of service in any branch of the military, okay, and you are experiencing a mental health crisis of some kind in your life, go to the VA because they have that requirement to provide service to you at that moment and in the aftermath of that moment for as long as is clinically necessary. That's federal law. It's not if the VA feels like it. It's not if the VA hospital wants to be nice today. This is what they're required to do
Right.
once you come and you make that report that, hey, something's going on and I need help. I need it now.
Yep. And if you can't get there, you get to a phone and you press those magic three numbers and they'll come to you. I mean, that's just how you have to deal with it. You deal with it with the like the threat that it is and just deal with it. So yeah, that's incredible advice. I'm glad we got through that. We got through a lot actually. And I do have one final thing here because we've kind of gone through the gamut, right? We started with education. We talked about healthcare. We talked about claims and time. Now we're talking about serious topics with firearms and such and mental health. Now I'm going to wrap it up in somewhat of a less exciting but very important topic that really is more about the families of veterans.
Good.
This
Yeah.
comes up in my world. So my this show is a wonderful hobby of mine. It's actually part of my mental fitness, if you will. But during the week, I spend a lot of time with families. I help people with investments and insurance. So from time to time, I deal with estates and I deal with people who are going through different stages of end of life planning, if you will. And I can't even count over the years how many times I've heard people say, well, I'm a veteran, so when I pass, just call the VA and they'll take
Yeah.
care of everything. Or I've had people say, oh, well, they pay for the burial. Or, oh, well, they'll do the will for you and they file it for you or whatever. If you could just kind of summarize what people need to know who are trying to take care of maybe estate planning or just general legal documents and pre-planning and such, if you could kind of put that into a bow for listeners to get the real bullet points there for them.
Definitely. So, first off, very important topic because the common phrase that you hear being used is the claim dies with the veteran, right? Whatever benefits are out there, whatever claims are pending, goes away when the veteran passes away. That is true. However, that does not mean that the eligible survivors, particularly surviving spouse and surviving children, are screened out from getting anything else. That is not the case. What benefits are commonly out there? The big one is called dependency and indemnity compensation. Another mouthful, DIC for short, okay? Pathway into DIC for a surviving spouse, a surviving child, or a surviving financially dependent parent comes in two basic ways. One is the veteran had a 100% rating for at least 10 years prior to their date of death. Okay? That's one pathway in. In that pathway, the veteran's cause of death does not matter a bit. 100% rating, 10 years prior to death, that eligible spouse or eligible kids, they can get DIC benefits going forward. Like disability compensation, like pension, it's a tax-free monthly payout from Uncle Sam. The other pathway in is where life gets interesting because that other pathway is if you can show that the veteran's primary or secondary cause of death was related to their military service. Okay, so a service connected cause of death, if you will. And I'll talk about why service connected is in quotes in just a second. Service connected cause of death leads to DIC eligibility. Again, for eligible spouse, eligible kids, or financially dependent surviving parents. The reason why I put service connected in air quotes 3 times, so it must be true, is because even if the veteran did not have a disability compensation rating for the condition in question during their lifetime, Let's say they were stubborn. Occasionally, veterans can be stubborn. This may be surprising, but occasionally it happens. No, I'm not going to file. I'm not going to file. And unfortunately, pass away from that condition for which they should have filed during their lifetime. The good news is the spouse, the kids, they're not going to get punished for that. As long as they can show that this medical condition was at least as likely as not related to that veteran's military service, and that that condition was the primary or secondary or even tertiary cause of death, they should still be able to get DIC benefits from the VA. So, common example we see Vietnam War veterans, right? Like my uncle, exposed to Agent Orange, okay? And they never file for the benefits during their lifetime. They pass away from, let's say prostate cancer, okay? Prostate cancer is one of many conditions presumed by the U.S. Department of Veterans Affairs to be linked to Vietnam War service and exposure to Agent Orange in that service. So even though the veteran in that scenario that I just gave you was not getting disability compensation during their lifetime, all the surviving spouse or eligible surviving kids have to do is show cause of death was prostate cancer, veteran served in Vietnam, therefore VA, you have to presume that the prostate cancer was linked to their service, and therefore DIC benefits need to be paid out. All right. The other one is survivor's pension. This is regardless of cause of death. It's for a surviving spouse or, in some rarer cases, surviving children, where the household has extremely low income and extremely limited assets. All right. That's easy enough to grasp. Where folks kind of get bound up there is they see a requirement that the veteran who has passed away has to have served during wartime for that surviving spouse or surviving kids to get the survivor's pension benefit. And they hear wartime, and mentally they equate wartime with combat service. Two entirely different things. Wartime service does not require you to set foot in a combat zone. Wartime service requires that the veteran served somewhere in the world during a period of war. Okay, the time frame matters, the geography does not. So you could be stationed at Fort Drum in Watertown, New York. Okay, if it was during a wartime era as defined by Congress. So, for example, Gulf War era began August 2nd, 1990, and continues through the present day. Okay, service anywhere in the world during that time frame checks that wartime service box.
Hmm.
Combat service is not required for eligibility for that benefit. So that's DIC and death pension. Okay. Another common, all too common scenario is veteran passes away while a claim is still pending. Right? They filed for disability compensation or they filed for pension and they pass away before that claim gets adjudicated. Claim got caught up in the VA backlog and it's still sitting there. Again, the common phrase is the claim dies with the veteran. And people assume, okay, well, that's it, game over. Not necessarily. There is something called a substitution claim that does not get told to eligible survivors nearly enough. So here it is. When the veteran passes away, if they have a claim that is still pending, the eligible survivor can file for substitution within 1 year. And the key deadline there is 1 year. And the
Hmm.
VA holds firm to that deadline of 1 year. Okay. You file the proper paperwork. And again, we can help with this. So give us a call if needed. Within 1 year of the veteran's date of death, you establish yourself as the substitute claimant. And that means you get to come in and stand in the shoes of that veteran who has passed away. Meaning, you can add more evidence into the file. You can appeal if you get a wrongful decision. You have pretty much every legal right and pretty much every legal status that the original, now deceased claimant had. All right? So, a lot of times we see surviving spouses serving in this role, and they get to pursue the case, hopefully all the way to justice. But they get to do so if and only if they file to serve as that substitute within 1 year from the date upon which the veteran passed away.
Wow. Yeah, I didn't know
Last
that at
big
all.
area there is the burial benefits piece, right? So this can be a whole half hour by itself. I promise I'll keep it brief. The big mistake that we see people making there is the assumption that you can be buried in a national cemetery. For example, out west, you have the National Cemetery in Pembroke, We also have a New York State Veterans Cemetery now in the Finger Lakes in Romulus on the old grounds of the Sampson Naval Training Station and the former Sampson Air Base. The assumption is, oh, I can be laid to rest only if I've heard the Purple Heart, I've heard the Congressional Medal of Honor, I've heard the Bronze Star with Valor device, I've heard 20 years of service. None of those things are true, okay? Eligibility for burial in a national cemetery or a state veteran cemetery that's run in collaboration with the National Cemetery Administration is actually much simpler than many veterans think. Okay, there's no specific medal or decoration or honor that you have to have. There is no specific length of service you have to have. There's no requirement to have served in a combat theater. The main thing you're looking for here is a character of discharge under honorable conditions from active service in the military, naval, air, or space service. So any of your military branches, okay, are encompassed in this. It's not a matter of, oh, if I don't have the Purple Heart or something equivalent to that, I can't be laid to rest in a national cemetery. That's definitely not true. In fact, the VA even encourages people, this is kind of a dark way to go here, but it's an important one as far as planning is concerned, to plan ahead. And you can plan ahead by preparing and presenting a pre-need eligibility assessment to the National Cemetery Administration, and that way you can find out right from them, hey, am I eligible for burial in a national cemetery or a state veteran cemetery, right? And get all that information squared away. And you can have these conversations during your lifetime about how you want all of that to take place. The National Cemetery Administration provides, for those who wish it, a government issued headstone or government issued marker. Okay, there's various designs from which you can choose. You can do that during your lifetime if you're eligible to do so. They provide the burial flag. They provide the Presidential Memorial Certificate, and you can get as many of those printed as you want, signed by the president to members of the family who want to receive those. And there's also the last big piece that gets kind of confusing is the VA offers burial expense allowances. The term burial is kind of loosely used here. It's interment. So cremation, for example, is eligible as well. The amounts, here's the confusing part, differ depending on the nature of the veteran's death. What I mean by that, if the veteran passes away from a service-related condition, okay, number one, that should trigger eligibility for DIC, like we talked about earlier, but that actually leads to a higher reimbursement amount for expenses related to the funeral and expenses related to interment than if the cause of death was a non-service connected condition. Okay? And here's the really odd one, to me at least. If the veteran passes away in a VA facility or in transit to or from a VA facility, the amount for the reimbursement under the so-called burial allowance is higher than if the death took place outside of a VA facility or in transit therefrom. Why does all this stuff matter? I mention this here in such excruciating detail because death certificates become extremely important documents in these scenarios, okay? And this is where if we have any coroners or any medical examiners listening to this, okay, then I want them to understand the importance of making certain the cause of death box in the death certificate is filled out and filled out with accuracy, because that can make all the difference in the world for the surviving family when it comes to filing for DIC and when it comes to filing for the proper amount of their burial expenses reimbursements from the VA, right? If that cause of death is left blank, or if that cause of death is erroneously reported as being something other than the service-related condition, that can wind up making things a lot more difficult for that family to get the DIC benefits and to get the proper level of burial reimbursement. So please, if anyone happens to be in that workspace or knows somebody who is, please pass that along, and please let's make certain that we get those death certificates filled out accurately, because my colleagues and I just reflexively cringe every time we get a death certificate shown to us, the first thing we look for is the cause of death blank box. And if that cause of death box is blank, we say, okay, it's still not game over at that point. There are still ways to pursue it and to get it. All right. But it's much more difficult for the family, and it's much more difficult for their advocates if cause of death is not properly listed. So there's a lot out there for families. And again, the whole thing about the claim dies with the veteran. Yes, that phrase, you may hear it a million times, is true, but it does not mean there's not other stuff that you should be pursuing and acquiring for yourself and for your loved ones.
Yeah. Yeah, fantastic. Oh my gosh. You have given our listeners so much information. It's like a encyclopedia of
Well, hopefully, folks stayed awake. I know it was a lot of stuff and a lot of
no, it's
legalese, but
it's
it is kind of a detailed area of focus.
no, this was fantastic, and we do have to wrap up, but I have to tell you, there's no doubt in my mind. I mean, you have definitely helped people today just with what you've shared with us. So, folks, if you missed, and you probably did quite a few details, we've covered a lot. Go to our site, theliamacharlieshow.com. Underneath, there'll be a bio of this gentleman, and his department will be there for some links, phone numbers, as he discussed. Please, please, please share this with your veteran families. There's so much he covered. There's no way that there wasn't something covered in this hour that's going to actually be impactful to them. So share this. Don't keep it a secret. And another thing I'm positive of, sir, is you have certainly made your uncle and your family very proud. I want to thank you sincerely for all of us veterans of the work that you and your team are doing. It's just incredible.
Well, thank you. I'm honored to hear that, and there's a lot of good people in this workspace. One thing I've learned about working in this field is there are so many people who are devoted to it, who truly devote their entire lives to it. And so I'll talk sometimes with veterans who will say, "Look, I feel like I'm walking this road alone." And my response instantly is, nope, you don't have to feel that way because you have plenty of allies in this fight. Some are your fellow veterans, some are people like myself who are not veterans but who are veterans advocates. We're in a time right now, really, of veteran services renaissance in New York State and nationwide. There's so much out there, there's so many resources out there, and there's so many people who are devoted to this work out there that if you feel like you're on the hamster wheel and you're getting denied benefits you think you should be getting, and you want to have allies in that fight with you, reach out. Again, for us and all of my colleagues, our number is 1-888-838-7697. Our website is www.veterans.ny.gov. Okay, connect with us. We're here for you. Every county in New York State has a county veteran service agency. They're there for you. There's wonderful veteran service organizations out there like the American Legion, Veterans of Foreign Wars, Vietnam Veterans of America, so many others, right? And there's also a lot of great peer-to-peer groups out there. I know out in Erie County, for example, you have a wonderful chapter of the PFC Joseph P. Dwyer Veteran Peer Support Program, where you don't have to enter into a setting of a particular formal request or anything like that. It's just veterans being together in community with other veterans. There's so much out there. No one should feel like they have to walk this road alone because what you've given, and I mean this sincerely, it's not just words, what you've given to this country is extraordinary. It's something that the vast majority of people never do, okay, including myself, have never done through the service that you've rendered. So don't feel like you're taking a handout. You're not. Don't feel like it's a sign of weakness. It's not. Don't feel like you're asking for more than you should. You're not. The benefits you earned are the benefits that you earned by virtue of the service and the sacrifice that you gave. All right? And if there's one message that needs to resonate to everyone who has served, it's that one. Because I'm telling you, not a day goes by, and today has been no exception to that rule, where someone who served in the military says to me, I don't need that benefit, or I don't need that service. I'm good. I can take care of myself. I'm all right. Or they'll say, I'm not even sure if I'm really a veteran. I didn't go to combat, or I don't think I served long enough. 9/10 of the time, the folks who are saying that absolutely are veterans, absolutely are eligible for a whole bunch of stuff they're not getting for themselves and their families. And it's stuff, again, I can't say it enough, that they have earned. So if you're listening to this and you're thinking, I'm good, I'm okay, remember, you earned that benefit. You earned that service. Okay? It's there for you. And do not be shy about utilizing it and leveraging it because that's what it's for. And again, you earned it.
Well said, sir. I can't thank you enough for the
Thank you.
kind words and the encouragement and the education here because it's just high in demand, and I'm glad you could supply it. So, uh,
Honor to. And again, there's a lot more stuff that we didn't even talk about today because if we did, we'd be here all night
yeah,
long.
yeah,
We
yeah.
would stave off insomnia then.
Yeah, we'll have some online, and we'll have to do this again sometimes. So, folks, like, once again, I've had the pleasure of interviewing. You've been listening here for the past hour. Benjamin Pomerance. He's a deputy counsel for the New York State Department of Veterans Services, and again, sir, I'm honored. I'm grateful, and you've done your family very proud. I'm so
Thank you.
grateful for your time, sir.
And thank you for yours, and thank you for having this show. It's a great service.
Thank you, folks. Stand by through the break, and we'll wrap up this week's broadcast. Stand by.